3, go. Okay, everybody, welcome to An Englishman, an Irishman, and a Load of Bollocks. And this is episode 17. And today we have the pleasure of speaking to Sara O'Donovan. Sara is an author who has just recently had her first novel published. So she's very kindly agreed to come on the podcast and tell us all about her book and her inspiration for writing it. So hello, Sara, how are you?
Hi there, Dave. Yeah, thanks very much for having me on. I'm very privileged to have been asked. All's good here. Thanks.
It's our pleasure, Sarah.
Absolutely, our pleasure. So what I thought would be a good starting point, Sara, is if I just read out the press release, which kind of like sums up your book, and then I think Paul's going to start with the questions. Is that okay with you?
Perfect.
Okay, so I'm going to read what you've sent to me because I feel it's a good starting point to set the scene. So, Sara's novel Within You, Without You, published by Valley Press in North Yorkshire, has received praise from author and actress Carol Drinkwater, who said this is a wonderful debut novel by Sara. She writes beautifully, and there is such a sense of compassion for her characters. Cork novelist Denise Wood said, the stirring evocation of love, Liverpool, and the mysteries of time kept me gripped from the first exquisite word to the last. Set in Yorkshire, Liverpool, Sussex, and Cork, Within You, Without You is a sliding door style story of Catherine, who thinks that she has seen her first boyfriend Ed on the side of the road on a dark and stormy night. However, someone doesn't just reappear like that, not when they died 20 years ago. Uncovering long buried memories of first love and its devastating loss, she returns to her past to try and rewrite her present, discovering that reality isn't what she had been led to believe. The motivation behind the novel, a case of mistaken identity a number of years ago when Sara drove past somebody who looked just like a friend who had died 2 years earlier. The novel took this as a starting point and then went on to base one of its main characters on this friend and explore ideas of going back in time to alter the present and future. So that sounds intriguing, and I know that Paul is eager to start quizzing you on your book there, Sara. So I'm going to hand over to Paul.
Thanks, Dave.
Yeah, great. A great opening there. Hi, Sarah. Welcome to the podcast. We really appreciate it. I suppose, first of all, congratulations on the book, Sarah.
Thanks for that.
Your first novel. So I'm sure it took a lot of hard work and slog to get there.
Yeah, it did. I mean, as Dave knows himself, it's a labor of love at the same time, but it does. If you kind of look back, it takes years really, and it kind of sort of flies by. But if you actually worked out when you started writing it, it's hard to remember. It could be sort of maybe 3 or 4 years, and then of course when you get published, then it's the whole editing, which takes another year. So yeah. So it's glad to have it in print now and out in the world a bit. All gone.
Amazing. Oh, Paul looks like he's disconnected, but I think he has a shaky internet connection sometimes. Oh. He'll be back on though, so we'll just carry
super.
on. We'll carry on, Sarah. Yeah. So I know this is quite a broad question for me to ask, but what was your inspiration for writing your debut novel?
Yeah, I suppose I always kind of wanted to write a novel, even since being little and everything. And I made a few attempts, because just to almost tell myself that I could get to the end of a novel, 90 or 100,000 words. And then that first novel didn't really go anywhere. I sent it out probably a bit too soon, and I sent it out to lots of agents, and it probably was really only a first draft. So anyway, I sort of pulled the plug on that one. And an editor, I worked for a literary festival and down here in West Cork, and an editor that I showed my first novel to said, it's a bit quiet. Maybe think of something with a little bit more mystery to it. And do you have an idea? And that's when I remembered this thought I'd had, which was, I was driving down a road near my home in Sussex. So while I live in Ireland, I'm half Irish. My dad's Irish, my mum's English, and I was brought up in England. But yeah, so I was driving down the road, and I could have sworn that this person in front of me was a friend of mine who died a few years ago. And of course, you know, when I got to him, I realized it hadn't, but it kind of always stayed with me, that memory, that image. And so that just came into my mind again. And so that's where I start the book. And then it just took a life of its own, you know, from there on in, really.
Wow, brilliant. Paul, we've got you back, haven't we? Yeah.
Yeah, I just got that. Sorry about that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, no worries.
I have this dodgy internet connection. I'm going to say I've got the dodgy internet connection usually, so it must be an Irish thing.
Well, I was looking at you know, as part of that press release there, Sarah, it was talking about how you derive influences from the places that you've lived in, that you've experienced. I think you mentioned Ireland, Liverpool, Yorkshire and Sussex. So, you know, is that something that was very, very powerful to you, like the hold of those places over you and the stories that are embedded in those places? How did you stitch those stories together?
Yeah, definitely. And you know, it's a real treat because places you love, you can actually just include in your book. And you can revisit them in your own time and in your imagination, and also have an excuse to go to those places. One being lovely Liverpool, which of course you're so lucky to live near or part of. Liverpool and North Yorkshire, especially Swaledale. And I suppose I was first drawn to Swaledale because of All Creatures, Great and Small, you know, back in the day. And so we went there about 20 years ago, and then have been there ever since. And of course, now we don't sort of go in terms of the James Herriot connection, but just for its own sake. So I was lucky during lockdown to be able to head off a few times and go over there every couple of months, really, under the guise of researching the book. But anyway, it's just an excuse, really. It's and Sussex is where I lived for the first 20 years or so, and then Cork is where I've been now since I suppose another 20 years or so. So yeah, I just was able to pull every place that meant something to me, and also yeah, it was a bit of a kind of self-indulgence as much as anything, really.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah, so I can you know, I can tell just from speaking to you the importance of those places and how they've contributed to your your storytelling, you know, in the book there. Just wanted to find out a little bit more about the reasons for your writing the book. Was it kind of like you said you've always thought that you've got a novel in you, and that you'd had one or two attempts before. Was it something deep, staring deep within from an early age, do you think, and you just needed to get to the right point in your life? Was there any particular event that happened that prompted you to finally realize that now was the time? Or was it just a general work in progress, or how would you describe that?
Yeah, like I kind of worked for a literary festival, and I suppose some people in that position would say that they were, you know, provoked, I was going to say, no, like inspired to write. But that's not really my story. Like, I think as much as anything, without being a bit strange sounding, it was my friend who passed on, and I got a pretty strong belief in place, like a spiritualist belief system. And ever since he passed on, I would have gone to spiritualist church and mediums and that sort of thing too, because he had a very big impact on my life. And never really came through and never really connected until very recently. And it was kind of, you know, I know most people may not share that belief system, but I was very sure that he was working through me in the writing of the book. And so it was a lovely way of actually connecting with him again. And so I think he was my motivation. And it was also a way of sort of fictionalizing his story and maybe rewriting it slightly. And also I just dedicated my book to him. And it was a way of, for someone who was not very, died very young, had quite a tough life and had a drug problem, and probably wasn't seen. And so I thought maybe my book was a way of seeing him properly. So I felt that was my real motivation. So I don't consider myself particularly interested in building a career as a writer or anything like that, but just writing and just working with what we don't see, the invisible, that can actually bring me on a spiritual journey as much as just creating a book in print.
Wow, that's lovely the way you've described that. I know you'd mentioned to me before about the tragic story of your friend all those years ago, and just from your talking there, it sounds that not only were you in some way guided by him. It also strikes me as a legacy for not only you, because you've written the book, but for him as well, because he's the inspiration for the book. Is that accurate? Is that fair?
Yeah, that's a lovely way of putting it. It really is. Thank you for that. I'll remember that. Yeah, and also, you know what? It's this time we're in. I feel that spirit is very important at this time, and I feel that he's kept me on the straight and narrow during this time. You know, been a guiding hand really. And I think when I writing the book with him, I know that sounds flaky, but writing the book as I did, I feel that really kept me you know, my equilibrium throughout the madness of the last 3 years. So I think there's no accident that it happened now. Everything in divine timing sometimes, maybe. I don't think I'd even thought about that until I've just said it. But yeah, I think sometimes, you know, there's so much dark, but there's so much light as well. So, you know, that was a way of tapping into the light.
Oh, lovely. So the book, so did you write most of the book and most of the work for the book and the inspiration during the lockdowns? Is that right? Is that when you were kind of called to write the majority of it? Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, it just happened that way, really. I was just lucky to get the pub. No. Yeah. I suppose I'd done a certain chunk before, maybe 30,000 words or something, and then it took then I worked with a mentor briefly, and then he kind of put me on the straight and narrow a bit. You know, I had gone down a few cul-de-sacs, and then he came back and encouraged me to write the backstory, which was the fictionalized story of my friend and myself. Yeah, so it was during lockdown. And so, yeah, I think a lot of people wrote during lockdown, but that might have been a practical thing. But I think I just, almost without realizing it, it was a time for me to kind of access what was needed at that time, you know.
Yeah, it is something that appears to being quite a common thing, because it certainly was with me. I wrote the majority of my book during the lockdowns as well. And I think you alluded to there something you said about the light shining bright in the darkness. And, you know, we're living in very, very troubled times at the moment, albeit I think there are welcome signs of a growing, I call it an intellectual and moral, you know, counter-revolution. But I think in those very dark days of the first lockdown, I think something was at play to kind of like stimulate and accelerate what this world really needed and needs going forward. When you think about the number of alternative media, the number of new podcasts, YouTube channels, crucially books, such as your book as well. And I think it's amazing that we live in a time where, although most people might not sense it and see it, I believe there's a real explosion of creativity. And I think a lot of that is driven as well by, you mentioned about the spirit and spirituality, and I wanted to ask you about that as well, because I think something else that might be happening is that more and more and more people are allowing themselves to be inspired, influenced and guided by whatever God is to them, whatever spirit is to them. Which brings me to the next question, which is, I think you said you described it as you have a spiritual way of living. I just wanted to know what that is for you and how that contributed to your inspiration for writing the book.
Oh, yeah, I love what you said about inspire, because I think I heard Wayne Dyer say that a few years ago, like inspire is meaning in spirit, which is really kind of motivating, I think. And also when you say about the creativity, because I mean, like that is tapping into something that is such a powerful force, which, you know, so much is being dumbed down and so much is being kind of, you know, squashed in it, isn't it? So like that's almost like a counter action or something. But yeah, I don't know if I live spiritually at all. My goodness, quite the opposite, I guess. But I suppose my spirituality would be very much like, you know, I visit a medium quite often. I do sort of spiritual work with her, and would have, as I say, visited spiritualist church. You know, love the idea of connecting in with people who've gone on. Yeah, probably not as diligent as I should be, really. I think writing is spiritual practice for me, actually, really. But yeah, it was something you sort of don't talk about that much because it's always a personal thing, really, isn't it? And you know, there is a reaction, a knee-jerk reaction, I think, sometimes when people hear that, you know, that you have that side of your life, because I think, you know, we live in a very secular world now, which isn't positive whatsoever. And I think maybe the secular nature of our world has contributed to what people have put up with in the last while. I mean, you know, I'm not religious or anything, but you know, the churches were closed here, which I thought was an abomination, really. And surely when people needed it most. So yeah, I mean, I think I often thought throughout the last few years, if I didn't have my spiritual belief system, you know, I don't know how I'd have dealt with it, really.
Yeah, which brings me to the next question, really, then, about the. So you started writing your book, and you continued it during the insanity of the lockdowns at a time when the world appeared to be going completely insane, and we were heading down a very, very, very dark and dangerous path. And well, I guess first of all is that, you know, do you agree with that statement I've just made there? And secondly, you know, what's it been like to write your book at a time when, you know, the world is in a very, very troubling epoch at the moment, you know, and just some more views on how you perceive Western societies, particularly with regard to the secular nation, the kind of like the nations have maybe lost touch with God and spirituality, become more secular, more compartmentalized, atomized. So how do you perceive that?
Like, firstly, I totally agree with what you say. You know, when you say, do I agree with that? I completely agree. But also, like, I think in Ireland, and Paul would, I'm sure, agree if he was here, like, we had much longer lockdowns. Like, you know, we had you know, I think I wrote it down recently just to have a grasp on it, but our lockdown lasted right away from that March 2020. Crikey, it was right through till May. It started again kind of sort of soonish, like November. And we had it almost solidly, because I know my you know, my best mate in England and everything, you know, didn't see it quite the same way, even though she was on the same page, because she was like, well, you know, we don't have those restrictions. But here they were guarded checkpoints every, you know, 3 kilometers or something from our houses. People who didn't go ahead with a certain medical procedure weren't allowed to go into restaurants or pubs, or you know, that Christmas, you know, it wasn't possible to go into places. And at some point it looked like it was heading towards maybe shops, and you know, I mean, it was impossible to come back into the country without one of those, or a test, or so yeah, I mean, very much a two-tier society, very much a segregated society, and you know, a lot of people were okay with that, which I kind of have a big problem with. And yeah, I think the secular nature of it, I think, you know, people have switched an internal compass to something very externalized, and you know, where government is the new leader of their thoughts, and of their you know, how they choose to live their lives. I mean, I think it's changing a little bit here at the moment, but yeah, I think that it's quite a splitting that's gone on. You know, a bifurcation, I think, is what people refer to it as. But it seems like there's two parallel realities going on in how people see this, and how people, you know, live their lives as a result. But yeah, I think definitely I think that's been happening a long time, though, the secular nature of everything. I don't know what, when religion was cast out, I don't really know what it was replaced by, except for maybe consumerism and, you know, watching a television, which, you know, I don't watch TV, and we don't have a TV, but like, you know, I see my dad's next door, you know, it's sort of shocking, I think, what's being peddled in form of adverts and content, which is very insidiously, you know, manipulating people. So anyway, I'll get off my soapbox.
No, it's really interesting. And you were saying about what religion has demised, hasn't it, in the last couple of centuries, probably. And you know, it's not just there's such a big chasm to fill there, and I think it has been filled with various. Well, certainly in the last in my lifetime by various political ideologies, organizations such as the NHS and the European Union, these bizarre kind of like woke-topian neo-Marxist kind of movements. And you were talking about the situation in Ireland there, and it was different. And I know that because obviously, Paul kept me in the loop right throughout, and it was difficult enough here, but Ireland did. It got entrenched, didn't it? A two-tier, apartheid, effectively. I mean, let's call it what it was. And I think a lot of us who have been aghast at what has happened in the world and to our communities, our workplaces, our friends and family, and how we've really seen people for who they are, have been shocked, haven't they? So, what has it shaken your faith in people? Has it shaken your faith in your belief system? What you've seen in the last couple of years?
Well, I suppose I could play it safe and say no, but the truth is absolutely, absolutely it has. Shocking. And it's been really hard to fathom as well, hasn't it? I mean, I think someone said once it's brought out the worst in people and the best in people. And, I think there's a community who's brought out the best in, and there was a lot of that here as well as the rest. But, people you've known all your life, family members, it's just shocking that people can't that they just believe everything, and that's going on right now. It's moving on. It's not just about what's happened the last 3 years. I mean, especially here in Ireland. I know it's going on in Britain as well, but like we're hearing reports night after night of what's a very dark path that's continuing here. So that worries me even more in ways. So I think you sometimes have to keep your keeping your own sort of sense of how you're seeing it is important, and I think the spiritual side of it kind of does help. Like I do get that envisaged, that vision of having being led by the hand through all of this, because sometimes it does feel very dark, doesn't it? And you think, where's the end of this? But I kind of listen to quite a lot of channel stuff that I trust. I know there's an awful lot of stuff out there which maybe is dubious, but that kind of gives you hope, keeps you going through it, and you think, okay, there's an end in with all of this. And that idea of timelines and keeping your frequency high in order to connect to the highest timeline available to us, I think it's important, but it can be a struggle sometimes as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's been astonishing to see the number of people who are, I was going to say, happy to contract their thinking and their morals out to the state. I don't even think they weren't happy to. They just did it, and lulled into such a sense of complacency with such kind of addictions to outright authoritarianism, as long as it comes with a large dose of consumerism and comfort. I think people are more than happy to be told what to do, in their life, and it's been astonishing for me to watch. However, we touched on it a few minutes ago about kind of like the counter revolution that I believe Western culture needs, and I believe it's happening. And that's why I try to develop connections with people like Paul. That's why we set up the podcast with conversationalists, with creators, with people who maybe understand that there's something greater than ourselves at play in this universe. Because if we are going to transition to an age that is genuinely more fair and altruistic and centered around local democracy and community, then those values of creativity and conversation and connection are very much needed. So for that reason, do you feel part of that yourself with what you've done, with the book that you've written, your inspiration for writing it, and the fact that you said you felt guided throughout as well, and it happened at just the right time? Do you feel part of that?
I do, and like I suppose what I didn't mention before as well is that very kind of synchronistically everything was really magical feeling around it. Like even even the way it's slotted together, the fact I found Valley Press, the publisher, I worked with a super editor. We had such fun with it. A lovely cover that the designer came up with. It was just absolutely a gorgeous experience from beginning to end. And then even then I had a book launch in December, and just to see the goodness in people, that they wished you well, you know, people that you know in your work group, or you know, they might not be people you share beliefs around and with and that sort of thing, but like, you know, there was a lot of good energy around it, which was absolutely lovely. So I think anything like that, it has to be a positive into the field, doesn't it? Anything that's and I mean, it's interesting what you say about conversation, because you know, like I'm half and half. I'm half Irish, half English, but mainly English because I was born there. But even talking to a neighbour, like a 70-year-old farmer last night on the phone, and he was saying that you just go into the local town and everything has changed so much. A small little town. I mean, actually, where I come from is the birthplace of Michael Collins, which is like really, really. I don't know if you know who that is, but it's so special.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean,
1916 uprising. Yeah.
I mean, his birthplace is literally 2 miles from our house, so I feel really privileged to live here because of that. But yeah, like my neighbor was saying, you know, you go into town and there's a dourness and people, they don't speak, and for the Irish that's shocking, and like the young people with, you know, something in their ears, you know, phone. It's the conversational art, which is the, you know, the Irish strong point. It's been squashed, and I think you see it so clearly here. And maybe I don't see it as much when I go back to England so much, but conversation was such a strength of the Irish, and to see it diminish as it does. You know, like I've got a daughter who you know, goes to secondary school, and just the lack of that, you see that in their generation. You know, she doesn't have a phone, she's a rarity because of that. But you know, she can sit in a room with other girls and they can just stare at their phones, and I think that's just absolutely tragic, especially for the Irish youth who you know, were so different before. So yeah, I know conversation is really important to you, isn't it? And your book talks a lot about that.
It's something that I feel that is very important. It's actually a shame that Paul's internet connection's dropped out, because I know we would have enjoyed talking to you about how the cultural values of Ireland have been diluted or destroyed in the last generation. The dog's just joining me here, Diamond. Hello. But I think we've got 10 minutes left, approximately 10 minutes. So what we'll do, Sarah, is I was wondering, could you tell me just a little synopsis on the book? And also, it might be nice for you to give it a little, feel free to give it a little plug as well about where people can get a copy if you want.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Do you know, I'm really
problem.
bad at, I'm so bad at describing my book. I'm really hopeless at describing my book.
It is difficult, isn't it, to summarize your own book? I find it difficult to
desperate.
summarize mine, but I'm asking you anyway, so.
So like I'd either say, I completely mess up all the time when I have to summarize my book. Yeah. So it's kind of like at the start of the book, there's my main character is Catherine. She's driving along. She lives in Ireland. She's going home to see her mum. She's driving along the road and she sees who she thinks is her first boyfriend, Ed. But of course, you know, the premise being that it can't be because he died 20 years ago. She is then stuck looking after her mum her mum's house for a couple of weeks. She's thrown back into her memories. And then mysteriously, the book then takes a long backstory of long flashback into their relationship, how it grew. He came from Speak in Liverpool. She was down south, and there was a lot of 90s references, and so that was fun to write. And then there was a mysterious moment where she is drawn through this. She's back in Sussex, and she is drawn through this wood and into like almost like a portal, and she is able to see her younger self, her boyfriend Ed, and she knows that she's there to assist in changing something so that he doesn't die. And then when she comes out of that moment, she doesn't know if it was a dream or not. But circumstances sort of conspire to make her realize that it's not. And so she returns to a place where they said they'd meet in 20 years' time, and wonders if he'll be there or not, and whether time has altered and whether there was another timeline in which he lived. And so it's quite a happy ending. So it was a bit tricky for someone who's not the brightest like myself. But it's on Amazon, and it's called Within You, Without You, which is the Beatle connection, the George Harrison, or the Beatles song, isn't it?
Yeah.
because of the Liverpool connection. And it's also available from valleypressuk.com, which is the publisher's website. Yeah, so that's it really.
So if someone was interested, which I'm sure they will be after listening to your talk and describing the book, they go to Valley Press. Is that valleypress.co.uk, and then they search for within you without you? Is that right? Is that how they would find a
Yeah,
copy?
it's I think it's www.valleypressuk.com.
Okay.
Yeah, I should know that, shouldn't I? Or Amazon might just be
Or
easier.
Amazon.
Yeah.
So we'll drop a couple of links to where people can purchase if they're interested in the
Oh
description
yeah,
for
thanks
this
so much.
podcast and to this video for you. It sounds like a story of magic and mystery and intrigue. I know my girlfriend Sara, I mentioned it to her before, and I was showing it to her, and she said she wants to read it. So
Oh,
yeah,
good.
definitely. And have you got any plans to write a second novel or a second book? Are you feeling compelled to do anything else in the
Yeah,
future?
I've had a bit of guidance around my next one, and I've made a few starts and stops and everything, but I need to, yeah, it's really knocking on my shoulder. Yeah, it's going to be a sort of different book again, but I again, from my sort of mediumship sort of sessions, I believe there's 2 more books to come, and then I might,
Okay.
I don't know. So hopefully. But
And
thanks so much.
will that be a series, or will it be a completely different new set of characters, or do we not know yet?
Possibly a new, possibly some of the same characters. Yeah.
Okay.
The kind of, I love the way you use the word magic, because yeah, I think we've needed magic at this time, haven't we? We've needed that sense of possibility and magic, and to reassure us.
Yeah. Well, I think magic. It's whatever you want to call it, magic, or some call it the law of attraction,
Yeah,
spirituality, or God, or even if you say some people say that once they escape the matrix, they're free, and it's scary at first, but then you realize there's so much more to our realm of existence than the kind of like the narrow Overton window that many of us have been exposed to for our whole lives, and it's infinite, isn't it?
actually,
Perception's infinite.
interesting you say that, because the quote I've got that I picked for for the first part of the book is a Blake quote about the doors of perception. You know,
Right?
that famous Blake quote that
I don't
says,
know it. No, I don't know.
or actually it's a different Blake quote I used, but yeah, you know, that in the universe there are things that are known and things that are unknown, and in between there are doors. But it's also, he talked about the doors of perception, that if you could just wipe them clean, they would, you know, you would see infinity. And so it's, that kind of gives me such a buzz, the idea of that.
Yeah.
So that's into what you just said.
And the way you talk about the book and how you've your journey to write it from the idea to the writing itself, that you can just tell there's something deeper at play than just you thinking and putting pen to paper.
Yeah,
There's
yeah,
something there, isn't it? Because
the big
I felt that with my book, as difficult as it was, and I didn't particularly enjoy writing my book because it was a very difficult time for me, and it was very difficult content. However, there was something that was guiding me to write those words in that order, in the
yeah.
clarity that I believe I managed to string the sentences together to make the points I wanted to make. So, when it comes to your next book, is it the book after that, is it just waiting for the right moment, for the opportunity, rather than forcing things? Is that how you feel?
Yeah, it
Yeah.
is. Yeah, and I think I've been forcing it too much, because, but I've been led to an interesting guy called Anthony Peake, who has these really interesting ideas around time and you know, what's really going on, what reality and consciousness really is. So I kind of feel I'm being guided to listen to him a lot more, and also to take on whatever's put in your path, because I think that's meaningful, to
Yeah.
help with the next book, rather than just kind of make up a story and go with it. I think
Mhm.
you have to listen to the sign, or spot the signs, and listen to the guidance of it.
Yeah, which can show itself, I guess, at the most unusual
Yeah,
times, unexpected times, really, possibly.
and it's what
I
makes
often,
life Yeah.
I was going to say, I often find when I have my most creative ideas that it's when I'm not trying to conceive of an idea, that's when they strike, isn't it? You know, that's when
Yeah.
maximum creativity seems to arrive and possess us, r rather than trying to create our way to something. It's just wait, and then the impulses tend to strike. Again, there's something mystical and magical about that, isn't there?
Big time. It's like you have to get out of the way, because almost like it's almost already written. You just have to find it and just transcribe it. Is how I
Wow,
see it
yeah,
a bit. Yeah.
amazing, amazing.
Yeah.
Right, we're just starting to run out of time now, Sarah.
Oh,
We've got 2 minutes left. So now it was a shame Paul's internet um disconnected,
yeah.
because I know he had some questions to ask you. He would have wanted to talk to you about, I think, your Cork connections and ask you a little bit more about Irish life and culture and values. So I don't know whether he might want to do another one with you if you wanted to.
Oh, that'd be
So
great fun. Yeah.
yeah, just to maybe
You
explore
sure?
some more. Yeah, of course, yeah, because you know, I did say to you, didn't I, that the time will fly and that you're an interesting. I know you were worried that you wouldn't have much to say, but it's been really good, and you know, it'd be really good for Paul to be able to ask him, to ask you
Ah,
his
super.
questions as well. So we'll try
Ah,
and sort
thanks.
that out then, and I'll email you. Got a minute and
Lovely.
a half left, but I just wanted to say
Oh.
thanks very much.
Oh,
For,
thanks so much to you, Dave, and like mainly for what you do, like all the time you give and all the content you put out, and that sense of got, you know, reassurance that you give people as well, that sense of company on this road we're on, you know.
Yeah, that's very kind. Yeah, on this crazy road that no one knows where it's ending up, but we've just got to, yeah, we've just got to walk it, haven't we?
We have, yeah.
We've just got to face it bravely on, and I believe that's what enough of us are doing, actually. So yeah, thanks again, Sarah. So we'll put a couple of links in the description then for anyone who's watching this on YouTube or listening to it on Spotify or wherever else you listen to it. There'll be some links in the description where you can go and get yourself a copy of Sarah's book Within You, Without You. And thanks again, Sarah, for what was a really, really great conversation. And
Oh,
hopefully
lovely.
we'll
Thanks
speak
a lot.
again soon.
Super. I've loved it. Thanks a lot then, Dave.
All right. Thanks, Sarah. Bye bye. See ya.
Bye.